The Olympic Games. For over a century, it has been the pinnacle of human endeavor, a global stage where mortal men and women transcend their limits to achieve immortality. We see the glory, we celebrate the triumph, we are inspired by the spectacle of human potential concentrated into a few fleeting weeks of near perfection. The lighting of the torch signifies hope, unity, and the start of a dream. But behind the blinding spotlight, there is a shadow, a dark, cold truth that is rarely spoken of. For some, the pursuit of that dream, or even just the construction of the very stage it's played on, comes at the ultimate, irreversible cost. This is the story of that cost. The story of those who chased Olympic glory and found only tragedy. This is the dark side of the 5 rings. Our story begins in Stockholm on July 14, 1912, the marathon. Francisco Lázaro, a 21-year-old carpenter from Porto, Portugal, stood at the starting line. He was his nation's flag-bearer, a symbol of hope, lining up for what would become the deadliest marathon in Olympic history. The conditions were brutal. At 1:45 p.m., as the starting gun fired, temperatures had already reached 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 Celsius, with oppressive humidity. The 26-mile course was a furnace of asphalt and dust, an endurance test that pushed the limits of human physiology. Lázaro, having trained only in Portugal's moderate damp climate, was terrified of the sun. Before the race, in a desperate attempt at self-preservation, he made a fatal decision. To protect himself from sunburn, he covered his entire body with a thick, heavy layer of beef fat and wax. He believed he was creating a protective shield. Instead, he had just sealed himself inside a tomb. This waxy layer created an impermeable, waterproof barrier. As the 69 runners began the grueling race, their bodies' natural cooling systems kicked in. They perspired. The evaporation of that sweat is the only thing that kept them from cooking from the inside out. Lázaro's body tried to do the same, but it couldn't. His skin was suffocating. He started conservatively, but as the miles wore on, his internal temperature began to rise relentlessly. Sweat accumulated uselessly beneath the waxy prison, unable to evaporate. At the 18.6-mile mark, witnesses reported he was staggering wildly, disoriented, and appeared confused. Classic, terrifying symptoms of catastrophic heat stroke. His cooling system had failed completely. With just 5 miles to go, Francisco Lázaro collapsed onto the dusty road. Spectators rushed to his aid, finding him unconscious, burning with a fever his body had no way to fight. His skin, beneath the melted wax, was pale and clammy. He was transported to the Sarafemer Hospital, where doctors worked frantically to lower his body temperature. But the damage was done. He never regained consciousness. He died the following morning from extreme dehydration and an irreversible electrolyte imbalance. Francisco Lázaro became the first athlete in the modern era to die during Olympic competition. His death, a direct result of a tragic miscalculation, forced the Olympics to introduce the first safety protocols, including mandatory water stations. A change that came one life too late.
48 years later, in Rome, 1960, the heat would claim another victim, but this time it had a sinister partner. The event was the 62-mile or 100-kilometer team time trial. The temperature was an almost unimaginable 104 degrees Fahrenheit over 40 Celsius. 23-year-old Danish cyclist Knud Enemark Jensen was part of a four-man team favored for a medal. They were desperate to win. So desperate, they turned to a chemical edge. Jensen, along with several teammates, had taken Ronicol, a blood circulation stimulant and vasodilator. At the time, it was technically legal, but its side effects, especially when combined with extreme exertion and crippling heat, were dangerously misunderstood. The drug was meant to improve performance by increasing blood flow, but under the scorching Italian sun, it threw his body's temperature regulation into chaos, causing his blood pressure to plummet. As the race progressed, Jensen's teammates noticed he was weaving, struggling to hold his line. They encouraged him, even yelled at him to push on, mistaking the clear signs of a medical emergency for simple fatigue. By the 54-mile mark, with just 8 miles remaining, Jensen was clearly in trouble.
Suddenly, with 5 miles to go, Jensen collapsed, falling from his bicycle and fracturing his skull on the asphalt. His teammates and officials stopped to assist, finding him unconscious. He was transported to a Rome hospital, but he died several hours later. The autopsy was shocking. It revealed the presence of the stimulant, which, combined with the heat, had overwhelmed his system. Knud Enemark Jensen's death was not just a tragic accident. It was the first Olympic death officially linked to doping. It sent a shockwave through the International Olympic Committee. His death was the catalyst that led directly to the formation of a medical committee and the first ever mandatory drug testing at the Tokyo Games 4 years later.
The Summer Games have their heat, but the Winter Games have their speed. And in 1964, the Innsbruck Olympics showcased the most dangerous sport of all, the downhill. Ross Milne was a 19-year-old promising skier from Sydney, Australia. He was one of his country's best, representing a nation with limited access to world-class snow. He had arrived weeks early to acclimatize and train on the infamous Patrick Stoffel downhill course. It was known by all as one of the most challenging and unforgiving on the international circuit. A sheer, icy track with a vertical drop of over 2,800 feet, where skiers routinely exceeded 80 miles per hour. On January 25, 1964, just days before the Games began, Milne was on a final training run, pushing the limits. Snow conditions were firm and fast, unforgiving of the slightest error. As he rocketed through the upper section, he encountered a particularly challenging sequence of turns. What happened next was debated. Some reports from the time, including from his own team, suggest he swerved, perhaps to avoid a crowd of spectators who had gathered too close to the track. Other officials claimed it was simply a technical error. Regardless of the cause, at speeds estimated to be over 62 miles per hour or 100 kilometers per hour, there is no margin for error. Milne lost control. He was carried off the prepared racing surface, fighting to regain his skis, and hurtled into the dense woods bordering the course. He struck several large pine trees. The impact was catastrophic, and he died almost instantly from massive trauma. His death was a brutal reminder of the razor-thin line between glory and tragedy in a sport where athletes willingly rocket down mountains of ice. It led to improved course safety, wider margins, and the first use of protective barriers. Another set of rules, written in blood.
But athletes are not the only ones who have died for the Olympic dream. There is an unseen, uncounted human cost, paid long before the torch is ever lit. The cost paid by the thousands of workers who build the arenas of glory, often under immense pressure and in dangerous conditions. The 2004 Athens Olympics were a race against time. The Greek government had delayed construction for years due to bureaucratic red tape, forcing contractors into a desperate 24/7 rush to meet deadlines. Workers reported 16-hour shifts, 7 days a week, and safety protocols were often ignored. On March 15, 2004, 45-year-old Dimitrios Antonopoulos was working on the massive steel and glass roof of the Olympic Stadium, installing lighting. His safety cables failed. He fell 100 feet to his death. 3 months later, on June 2nd, 38-year-old crane operator Nikos Georgiou was killed when his crane collapsed while lifting heavy steel beams for the aquatic center. The crane was being operated beyond its rated capacity to meet the impossible deadlines. In total, at least 13 construction workers, and by some counts more, died building the Athens dream. The situation in Rio de Janeiro for the 2016 Games was even deadlier. Brazilian authorities officially acknowledged at least 11 construction worker deaths. On March 27, 2013, Anderson de Silva Santos was installing concrete forms when a 440,000-pound crane collapsed during high winds. It was being operated in conditions that exceeded safety guidelines. Santos was killed. On April 3, 2014, 2 more workers, Fabio Luis Pereira and Ronaldo Oliver dos Santos, were crushed when a section of the Idar Stadium roof collapsed during installation. The most public tragedy occurred on April 21, 2016, when a brand-new bicycle path, built as an Olympic legacy project, collapsed into the ocean, killing 2 civilians. Investigators found substandard materials and fatal design flaws, the result of a systemic pressure to cut corners. These men were not athletes. They would never stand on a podium. But their lives were sacrificed for the same games, their deaths a haunting testament to the unseen cost of the spectacle.
Our final story takes us to Vancouver, 2010. It was February 12th, just hours before the opening ceremony. 21-year-old Georgian luger Nodar Kumaritashvili was taking his final practice run. He had trained his entire life for this moment, following in the footsteps of his father and uncle, both luge athletes. The Whistler Sliding Center was notorious. It had been intentionally designed as the fastest and, by extension, most dangerous luge track in the world, with speeds regularly exceeding 93 miles per hour. In the weeks leading up to the Games, several athletes had already crashed, raising serious safety concerns. Italian luger Armand Zogaler had publicly called the track too fast. Nodar began his run. He was traveling at approximately 90 miles per hour as he approached the final challenging 16th turn, known as 50-50. Something went terribly wrong with his steering. Video analysis shows his sled drifting too high, too late. The massive G-forces were too much. His sled shot up the banking of the turn, and Nodar was ejected, launched from the track like a projectile. He was thrown at over 87 miles per hour, flying several yards before striking an unpadded, solid steel support pillar. The impact was horrific, causing massive trauma. Medical personnel reached him within minutes and attempted CPR, but his injuries were unsurvivable. He was pronounced dead at Whistler Healthcare Center, just hours before he was scheduled to march with his team. In a frantic overnight scramble, officials padded the steel pillars and raised the walls of the track, but the modification was a tacit admission of a fatal design flaw, a correction that came only after a young man had paid the ultimate price, his death broadcast for the world to see.
Francisco Lázaro, Knud Enemark Jensen, Ross Milne, the dozens of unnamed workers, Nodar Kumaritashvili. They are all bound by a tragic shared fate. They are the human cost of the Olympic Games. We celebrate the glory, the records, and the national pride, but in doing so, we must also remember. We must remember the lives sacrificed at the altar of ambition, speed, and spectacle. They are more than statistics, more than footnotes in history. They are the athletes and the builders who, in their own pursuit of greatness, revealed the dark, fatal truth hidden behind the 5 rings. If you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's forgotten chapters. And we want to dedicate this space to their memory. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know which story touched you the most, and join us in paying respect to the lives that were lost.